Okay, so here we go. Agents of authority. As mentioned earlier, my work is really about empowering artists and activists with archival methodologies. I think this kind of went over it in my bio a little bit. So I'm going to talk about archival practice a bit. So the way that I like to work with folks and empower individuals and collectives to amplify their stories and practices by harnessing the power of structured data and digital and analog forms, and sort of the role that the body plays in memory work as well. All of this is to sort of process and catalog experiences and memories that do not have documentation and establish relationships between elements of practice as it pertains to said documentation, concepts, processes, materials, methodologies, themes, patterns, and inquiry. Um, and really just like sort of, I'm gonna like take a step back from that. That's like kind of the wavy upper level of what I do, but I thought I'd ground us first in archives and what they are. So archives are traditionally a collection of historical documents or records providing information about a place, institution, or group of people. And then archivists are information professionals who assess, collect, organize, preserve, and maintain control over and provide access to records and archives determined to have long-term value. A lot of what we're talking about today is like who gets to determine what has long-term value. And I thought I'd go over archive types because they kind of exist in all of these weird places as well. There's corporate archives, there's museums, which, they also have their own archives within them, which are similar to a corporate archive, where corporate archives and archives in museums are usually records about the institution or about the organization. There's governmental archives, hot topic, that collect materials relating to local, state, or national government entities. There's religious archives that relate to traditions of institutions of a major faith and denominations within a faith, or individual places of worship. And those materials do have some availability to public, but they also may exist solely to serve the members of that faith. Um, yeah. And then there's college and universities, which have archival records about the college or university. And then there's historical. We are in one right now that preserve and promote interest in the history of a region or historical period. And then there's special collections that contain materials from individuals, families, and organizations that are deemed to have significant or historical value. Um, and those will often be held within a larger library system or university or organization. Then there's like the best type, right? Community archives. And those are created or accumulated, described, and or preserved by individuals and community groups who desire to document their cultural heritage based on shared experiences, interests, and or identities. And sometimes that's without the traditional intervention of formally trained archivists, historians, and librarians. And this can sort of happen around different events. It can happen around shared collective memory, collective experiences. A couple examples here, SADA, which is the South Asian American Digital Archive, which is what we call a post-custodial archives archive, which is the Queer History Project also post-custodial? Okay. So post-custodial means that they do not hold ownership of the actual items. So it's not about possession, right? It's about sharing information. A really cool project that SADA did was digging into reclaiming what the American road trip is, right? And kind of re-identifying, rebranding what the American road trip looks like. Another example here is from Hacking the Archive, which is a radical project that I'm an advisor for. That's uh, was the brainchild of Dr. Carolyn Crockett, where we worked with institutions across greater Boston to hack into the archive and get community histories out of these archives that are withheld in institutions to bring those into spaces where communities can engage with them. Through working with community organizations that had questions for the archive that often wouldn't make it through. They require like a bit of research, right? So they wouldn't make it through the traditional ask to the archive for materials because there is research that is involved in it. So I currently work at Boston University at the Gottlieb Center, and that is both the special collections and university archives. There's a history of nursing archives there, the personal papers of cultural figures such as Dr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from his time at BU is there. Sonia Sanchez, Elie Wiesel, and Howard and Sue Bailey Thurman. Their papers are all housed there amongst many, many others. So archivists are information professionals who assess, collect, organize, preserve, and maintain control over and provide access to records and archives. I read this already. So I'll dig into archival practice. And this really consists of building out systems to care for, easily identify, and find items that are worth recalling. Worth is in quotes here, and I'm wondering if anyone would like maybe want to take a stab at why worth would be in quotes. Yeah. So I don't know if y'all heard over here, it's Kiana. Yeah. 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 And it's something that is highly subjective. I think it's something like 84% of archivists are white. So there's a lot of, just sort of thinking around who gets to describe whom, gets to describe what, and who knows about communities, who doesn't know about communities, who has the privilege to describe, who has the knowledge to describe. A lot of this comes out of vocabularies that we use to describe work. This is a workshop that I did in Toronto with folks from all around the world. And it was a archival residency with hemispheric encounters where we all gathered together in the practice of gathering. And we're looking at the realm of archives and how vocabulary is used and controlled within those spaces. We work with like specific lists of words, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. So, majority of institutions, and this is used globally, use the Library of Congress subject headings. And those are lists of words and phrases that are used to indicate the topics of libraries resources. So if you're looking through a library system and then you see the keywords at the bottom, those are the Library of Congress subject headings. Does anyone have experience with these or know a little bit about them? Do you mind sharing a little bit?
Thing that I understand is that they're intended to be somewhat like universal, like shared across institutions, so that what one person calls something or what one group calls something isn't different from what another group, so that they can communicate with each other.
Yeah, so it's bringing a bunch of different words together. So that could be synonyms, homographs, all of these different elements together. So when somebody's looking for soda or they write soda pop or soft drink, they're all going to find, books about soda, right? But these shared words come from, what did I just did something. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, technical issue on our end. So yeah, these words or phrases are what we use in order to make sure that we're using the same word as somebody in another library system. So when you're looking across these library systems, that we can all get to the same thing. This is also, the data is only as good as the data, right? So if people aren't inputting certain keywords about something, that is not going to be found in a system, right? So we also use that in archives as well. We use controlled vocabularies. Does anybody know who controls the LCSH? There's like a little bit of a clue. in the title. So the Library of Congress is what controls it, right? So the way that this is done, and it's the work of like radical librarians and other folks that have added to the Library of Congress subject headings. But something that was kind of controversial, which I don't know if it only lived in library land, right? The changing and renaming of monuments and spaces in the US and beyond, right? Like that's been a hot topic. So one of the things that was on, they post lists, the Library of Congress post lists that we can as a public vote on, or we can share our public opinion. I shouldn't say vote. We can share our public opinion and we can do public comment on these. Something that came up recently was the Gulf of Mexico to be changed to Gulf of America. That traditionally is supposed to be left up for 1 week. That was left up for 24 hours and then taken down and then voted on by Library of Congress. So if you go do a search right now for Gulf of Mexico and something comes up, you can click on it, but then when you go down and you look at the subject headings, you look at the keywords, it now says Gulf of America. Huh? It's a lot of power. I can't get this to advance. There we go. So in the archives, we have something called a finding aid, and that's basically an inventory of a collection. And that starts out, I have this backwards here. So that starts out with processing. If I get materials from Ray, right? Ray's archive is here and sends a box of materials. We would unpack those materials, then we sort them to like materials, and then we'll put them in a folder, we'll label and describe them, and we'll assign them to a box. And that's something which we call a listing. And then that listing gets put in Excel. It gets like, goes through the computational system, and then it produces something called a finding aid. Or it will list in a different or live in a different operational system. But basically what this is the inventory to be able to find something. In those inventories, we also add keywords, we also add subject headings, and that's a way for people to access them. So it's really important on who gets to describe them. So I got a little wavy there and I got a little technical, but what I'm really trying to get at is that, to demystify information and data, it allows us to reverse engineer our own information architecture. So knowing a little bit more about how library systems work and how archives are built helps for us to then understand, this is the way that we think about power. This is the way that we sort of organize and see the world around us. And this is how we can then map them to those systems that exist, right? So to say that another way, this is really how we can sort of gain a little more control over the language and the narrative that is used to describe our own communities. So to do that, I think we'll take a couple minutes to think about power and what that means to us. And we can kind of build out a little bit of a structure around power and yeah, what that means and what the different elements are of it. Yeah. Does anyone have questions right now? Yeah. Okay. So to kind of lead us in this exercise a little bit, I'm sharing this format that I like to use to sort of distill terminology. So you can see here on the left, there's a cube and the word memory is in the middle of it. And then there's other words that for me are associated with memory. So that's lived, that's experience, thought, knowledge, recall, and data. So I think if we just take a moment to think about some words that are associated with power. Yeah, does anyone want to share? Yeah, share words associated with power.
Can we holler it out?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a little handicapped at the moment. Influence.
Influence? Okay. And I don't know if y'all can see this over here, but we're gonna try and do this. We have influence. Oh, yeah.
And I'm gonna have this
Maybe
production.
on a chalkboard, Tamashi.
Okay, I'll write it in the chat. Influence and production are my words.
Production? I click something I wasn't supposed to. Anybody else? Oh, never mind. Currency. Okay. I just don't know how to fix the camera.
No, you unblur your.
Yep. Have to go to Zoom. It's a Zoom setting.
Authority? Okay. Video. Control. Unblur. Just click my background.
Yep.
We good now?
Yeah. I think you're still sharing the screen though.
Jill, we good or no?
Yep.
Okay.
And then just more square it out so it's straight. And, okay, see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have influence, production, power, currency, control, and authority. So let's think about like the structure of this. So if we're making like a hierarchy of power based off of these words, and we're starting here, where are we going from there?
Control.
To control, okay. And then what sort of lives under there? Authority? All right.
Influence that's in there.
Influence under authority. Tamashi, can you say a little more about production? Or what is production bringing up for people?
Can you hear me, Claudia?
I can now, yeah.
Okay, I'm attached to a Bluetooth speaker and also in a bathroom. Kind of like we're doing. So I'm thinking about creative productivity, you know, like the right to create, to feel compelled and empowered to create, as opposed to a more passive state of consuming what has already been made by someone else, or imagining the power of creation and creative productivity to lie with someone else, someone or something else. You know, I'm thinking about like the opposite of considering oneself as solely a consumer, or, you know, like how citizenship over however many years has become over associated with consumption or consumerism, you know, to deserve suffrage or to deserve human rights, or, you know, even like in realms of healthcare, for example, we're referred to as consumers. Yeah, so I'm just thinking about like creative productivity, the power to make, and imagining one having agency. I guess that's a word, agency, like the agency to produce. Yeah, the agency to produce. And that could be food, of course. For me, I'm thinking about paintings and drawings and sculptures. Archive, information, historic documentation. To the tune of your workshop, Claudia, I've been thinking a lot about like what it means to reconsider oneself as an active participant in history making, the responsibility of archiving, as opposed to like imagining myself as only able to consume what has already been archived.
Yeah, exactly.
When and however that's made accessible to me. I'm leaving me at the mercy, basically, of many power structures that I don't understand.
Well, it's also bringing up, I was talking to Dana earlier as well. And with your work, what comes up for me too is like the idea of, like actual and factual when we're thinking about color theory and Anoki Farquhar and Joseph Albers, and we're thinking about perceptions of color when we're thinking about the literal, like if this red is a scarlet red, or if it's a blue red, whatever, you know, and sort of how colors can change based off of different lighting. There's like the physics of light that's involved with it. There's all of these different things that you know, add to whether something is actually something or if it's factually something, right? So I'm also, which makes me think about content and context as well, that surrounds authority, agency, and creativity. So without content and context, is it like an authoritative record? Is it documentation, right? And what does something need to exist with in order to be considered a record? And so I wonder if we sort of like recreate what this looks like a little bit. If we're thinking about agency versus authority, how does that sort of get positioned within this?
I feel like agency is intrinsic and authority is externally imposed.
Okay.
My explanation, I mean, I'm not trying to blow up the whole thing, but
Do it, blow it up.
that's my nature. So, I mean, I don't know that these are hierarchical at all. I don't know what your end game is, so I'm trying to patiently wait, but also,
yeah,
like, are we grouping like in like things, or what supports what, or, you know, like I see a lot of different ways to connect these. I don't know that there necessarily need to be in a hierarchy.
Yeah.
What's under what, particularly like, you know, what inspires what else, you know, might be a way to organize it as well.
Yeah.
When y'all were talking earlier, like what came up for me, because I was thinking of the currency of it, and in the same way of like the literal power to create something, like the, you know, Uji Chakolia, I would say that one, it's like being able to self-determine, like I live this, I experience this, and I've been taking it on myself to name this, and or relate it to other things. And also, even with that self, that could be even more collective, like how you were saying, the context, like the reason that I'm naming it this isn't just based on my own self, even though it says self-determination, that self there is just one part of a, I don't know what I mean.
Yeah, like the collective, right? Like, yeah. And then who said currency?
I said currency.
You said currency. And when you're talking about currency with the content and context, are we talking about, because I think it was in close conversation when someone said when I think Tamashi said consumerism, right? Or maybe that was after, but so are we talking about currency in terms of flow of energy? Or are we talking about it?
Real quick,
Oh, yeah.
people are having a hard time online hearing you.
Oh, okay.
Just
Oh,
speak
yeah.
up a little bit.
I can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, y'all. For currency, what was in my brain was just both what I just said about the like the literal power, like the energy, the stuff that it takes to like similar to what the person said about production, like creation, like the literal like proof that it takes to put two and two together, or, you know, make a thing, or do something. So yeah, that kind of energy, but also electricity, like, you know, making something turn on, in all the ways that that means, both with people or with influence. Like, to me, that all kind of flows together, that influence, production, creation, self-determination, currency, like all of that to me, agency, all of that to me feels similar.
Yeah. Is there anyone in the chat or anything? I just want to check in. Oh, no, that's totally fine.
So there were some people who were adding, like words.
Oh, yeah, let's see.
So some of the words were direct or direction. And then someone else said, community and collective.
Okay. I don't think I have an eraser. So normally when I do this, I do it on cards and then we like move them around and stuff like that. So it's interesting to try and do it in this way. So if we're thinking about community and collectives, what does authority and agency look like when it's in community and collectives versus individually, and how do we deal with that?
When I think of authority as an individual, like
Yeah.
it seems very top down, like you're a single actor and you're maybe trying to influence a bunch of people, so it's very top down and vertical. Versus if I think about maybe not authority in a community or collective sense, but maybe I think about agency in a community and collective sense, that ability to like make action and make things happen, that feels more horizontal. There's no vertical, there's no top down.
Um, what else is coming up for people right now in this conversation? What is something that we need to like release in terms of authority and influence to like, so what I'm hearing, I think kind of that the desired state of sort of having this like agency over our own authority as collectives, as being in community is like, not necessarily that this is the end goal, but this sort of flow, right? This sort of like currency, right? Like we want to be able to be in this flow state. We want to be able to have this currency and we want to have the ability to create, right? And so production in that sense isn't necessarily about producing for the sake of producing and relating the consumerism, but being able to have that like autonomy of what production is and can be and what that relationship is to us being citizens and a collective. But I'm wondering like what's making sense for people to kind of like make sense of these together? Is anything else coming up for people?
There's some comments in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Matisse said, release the idea that it's always top down. We have power when we work together and can influence up, down, and all around. Lonnie followed up and said, release assumed knowledge on subjects and listen to community lived experiences.
And what is that, like, what are actions for that? You know, how do we ground that? How do we ground that release? Because that's not necessarily something we always have control over, right? Like, we don't have control over the top down. We don't have control over the authority. So how do we continue to protect like this area of creativity and power?
I mean, what comes up for me is that power is in that. And I mean, I don't know, you know, your presentation with the community archives, you know, might not be able to control necessarily. I mean, I didn't know about the Library of Congress having a comment period. I mean, I love libraries, you know, but I didn't know that. Now that I know that, I can try to be aware of that, you know. And if a large enough swath of people are aware of it, then we can shape certain things. But the community archives sounded like a way of validating and not waiting for permission to begin to do that and to value. I mean, everything that we value becomes valuable anyway. As a collective, it's not necessarily valued at the same time in the same way by the overculture, but I think that it's, yeah, if we're allowing ourselves to, power is like it's something you have to exercise. It's not necessarily given or received. You know what I mean? Like, you have power when you use it. I mean, somebody can say you have power, but if you don't use it, then you do. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just one of those things, I think. That's my thought.
Yeah.
Lonnie said in reply around your time, make spaces for experimental workshops around archive exploration.
I'm here for that. So what I'm hearing in a lot of this is like that which we return to, right? Like, how do we return to things? And in that returning, that gives us a lot of power, because when we're returning to those are things that, you know, it's about our own recall. It's about the way that we have envisioned something, remembered something, what that construct looks like for us, right? And that varies person to person. And yeah, I don't know. Is anything coming up for people with the idea of what we've returned to or what we recall, sort of those constructs, and how do we sort of tease out what is collective in that and the personal, and when are we sort of separating ourselves versus coming together with that, with those notions?
One thing I remember when I try to recall stuff is like the timeline. When did it take place? And other events that remind other things that might have happened. Just the way I remember things in my brain, like what else happened there. And then that tends to jog my memory, you know, in terms of me looking for things where they might be in my brain. Um, or where I was on a project and just trying to, you know, continue if I left it alone for a bit.
Is that something that's linear for you?
No, more like a web. Yeah, it's more like a web, remembering whatever was might have happened during that time, a series of events. It doesn't all come in order. Um, yeah. So yeah, no, it's not necessarily linear, but a lot of back and forth. Yeah.
So there's a lot of, you know, emphasis on spaces that have authority on memory and history tend to want to be linear, right? Like there is authority if your story is linear, right? You don't have authority if your story is not linear, right? If you're not working within a chronological order, if you're not working in a way that makes sense to everyone around you, you're discounted, right? You're discredited, and that unfortunately is like a lot of systems that we navigate, and we know that to not be true, right? That's not how we experience, that's not how we sort of embody memory, right?
Claudia,
Yeah.
we have two key comments here in the chat. Donna or Dana, hopefully it's one of them.
Dana, yeah.
Dana said, it seems with so much key information disappearing, such as government web pages and much more, that documenting and consolidating / sharing information from grassroots up is even more important and a way to creatively connect. Matisse then shared, THP, as in the History Project, is looking for alternative subject headings to sources like the Homosaurus, etc., because of the problematic nature of LCS, Library of Congress headings and the power and authority in there. Tamashi finally said, yes to chronological memory and how is remembered aligns with other influential events that affect public and private spaces. So comments, not questions, but yeah.
Yeah. Wait, can you read the last one again?
Yes, Tamashi.
And I'm wondering how we're doing on time also.
For sure. We have 10 minutes on our clock. Tamashi said this.
Yes. I'm loving all of this. Yeah. I think what I'll do is we'll take one of these. So another like tool that I use when I'm working with this stuff is I've been working on this card deck for a while, which I haven't quite finished yet, but it has prompts on it for archiving. And so I think maybe I'll just do, or Gio, I'll have you pull one.
Pulling a prompt for archive.
Okay, edit. And then Gio pull. So we have 3 cards, and those will be our past, present, and future. So Gio, what do you have?
I have edit.
Okay, so edit, and we'll look at that through the frame of past. Alchemy and Empress. So, okay. If we're looking at what's coming up, if we're like thinking about the past and edit, like what comes up for people with that in terms of power? What comes up for people in terms of present and alchemy? And what comes up for people with future and Empress? And I mean, even just sharing about what you think that those terms could mean in this context, right? So just kind of thinking about different ways of seeing and looking at things. So is something coming up for anybody?
I think with regards to edit and the past, I was thinking about this with like our web here is like, you can't know what will be important in the future. So it's very hard to edit in the present, and it's also very hard to edit things from the past because the future is still unknown. So it's kind of I think of like the idea of like I'm a graphic designer, and so a lot of things that I do, you don't want to make it so that you can't undo it forever. You want to make it so that there's like a word for it, but like non-destructive.
Yeah.
So like, how can we edit things in a way, or do we want to edit things in a way that's non-destructive? Like if we're thinking about an archive, like deciding what's worthwhile and not not worthwhile, like what is the hierarchy?
Yeah, it's also bringing up documentation for me, right? Like, what are the decisions that were made at the time to do that, to apply for the future, right? And it's similar to conservation. If you're conserving something, you always want to be able to go back and change that. If whatever you were using to conserve something is no longer the best thing to do, you want to be able to reverse that if you can. So yeah, digging into that a little bit. Gio?
Matisse shared on alchemy, blending multiple perspectives together, move past individual subjectivity and trying to find singular authority, find meaning in the many. And that was on alchemy, which is the present.
Okay, well, we have like, yeah.
Oh, sorry, 5 more minutes.
Oh, yeah, we got 5 minutes. Does anyone have questions, and or share about anything else that's come up for them?
Yeah, Lonnie put in the chat, systems of hierarchical power and classical European orders formed in a general classical understanding.
That's a great point. So a lot of what we know as archives in those systems were created to basically prove whiteness, right? It's deeply based in genealogical research as well, and colonization. Yeah. I appreciate you all very, very much. And
We have a question.
yeah,
Was your appreciation done?
yeah.
Okay, cool. How has alchemy changed, from Lonnie, how has alchemy changed your way, Claudia, on approaching the archive?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, I think I work a lot with Joyce Leanne Joseph, who's a Black memory worker who runs archival alchemy. And the way that it's sort of come up for me is that, you know, working with the archive was a space where that sort of, it allows for one to enter into something when you're like going through the archives, it gives you it's liberating. It gives you this freedom of viewing things in content and context from your own lived experience when you're navigating somebody else's experience or a topical experience. You're sort of in this space where you're, I think Bashizo said in a talk, like, I want to see how someone puts me back together, right? So this idea of like being able to enter into something and make that connectivity, right, is a really transformative experience. Because you could end up with a box of materials that to you has no relationship, right? But you start to like dig through that and you see those things, and it allows for you to be a person that's like participating with something, and it really brings out the currency. You become a conductor of this flow of this like information, right? You're not necessarily becoming an authority on some people's lives. I mean, that happens sometimes, right? Like the book by Tourmaline and Marsha P. Johnson is amazing, but we're really just sort of like directing this flow of currency and energy when we're in the archive. It's a really spiritual experience for me. And I think for a lot of people, yeah, if that makes sense.
From what you were just saying, it made me think of, I don't know if someone already said this, that alchemy or change, it lives in the present, like it can't live in the past and it can't live in the future. You don't have to live in partners. Like that's kind of where it sits. Like the current action is what's generating will change always. Even how the shaping, the how the past is viewed.
And that's connected to, there's like another element of archives, which is called like processing, and that's kind of like what we were saying earlier, or I was saying earlier with the way that we like sort out all of these things and all this information and classify it, that's like processing, right? So it's like also this reminder that like we have agency in those moments of like non-productivity and like creativity in the ways that we're like living in the present through the past, right?